Fear of the unknown, creatures of the night, timeless tales told forevermore, a chill of the spine, goosebumps and hair-standing terrors, candlelit, moonlit tales in the dark, or of broad daylight. Let's explore the realm of the macabre and delve into monsters within and without. Welcome to Macabre DeVille, a new podcast about spooky literature, with music brought to you by myself and Grant Howard. I am your host, Jackie DeVille. Episode 1. Fear of the Unknown. In Joseph Campbell's book, Primitive Mythology, he describes fairy tales in the very brief parts of the book, and he's talking mostly about how myth and fairy tales sort of overlap. One does not necessarily come first. It's just, it's really a lot more difficult than that. But in his book, Primitive Mythology, Joseph Campbell states, the dates of the formation of the main body of the Arabian Nights lie between the 8th and 14th century AD, though some of the tales appear to have been composed and added as late as the 17th century. The period is one to which the world owes a great many of its most fascinating wonder tales, since it was precisely in those centuries, throughout the Middle Ages, that is to say, that the custom of telling stories flourished most elegantly in the courts of Europe, India, and Persia, as well as in Arabia and Egypt. It must be recognized, therefore, that although our legend of the destruction of Cash may indeed be founded on some such act as that recorded of Ergomenes in the 3rd century BC, when the humanism of Greece penetrated to the sanctuaries of ritual regicide in the Sudanese Upper Nile, the incident has been rendered in a style and mood of about the 10th century AD. No one who has studied the art of the fairy tale will doubt that such a folk narrator of the 20th century as Eric Ben Hassul might faithfully communicate not only the plot, but even the very style of a tale contrived in the Middle Ages. One need only read the folk tales gathered by Jeremiah Curtin in the west of Ireland in the 1880s and compare them with Standish H. O'Grady's translations of the tales of the Fianna and Irish Saints from a series of 15th century Irish manuscripts to be convinced. The ability of traditional storytellers to hold their precious tales in mind to the minutest detail had already been noticed by the Brothers Grimm in the course of gathering their German collection. Anyone believing that traditional materials are easily falsified and carelessly preserved and hence cannot survive over a long period, the Brothers Grimm wrote, should hear how close the old storyteller always keeps to her story and how zealous she is for its accuracy. Never does she alter any part in repetition, and she corrects a mistake herself immediately she notices it. Among people who follow the old life ways without change, attachment to inherited patterns is stronger than we, impatient for variety, can realize. It is entirely possible, therefore, that our tale of the destruction of Cash may stem from the period and genius of the great collection of Scheherazade. But whence the tales of Scheherazade? And he goes on to talk about a specific story called The Destruction of Cash, and it's an Arabian story and has really big ties to the Book of 1,000 Nights and One Night, the Arabian Tales, where we get Aladdin and so on and so forth. But tonight we're not talking about Aladdin, we're talking about the Brothers Grimm, how they inspired horror and fancies of witchcraft and trolls and, stuff that you see a lot in the horror genres that we normally attribute to fantasy and horror and gothic literature actually seems to come from German folk tales, European folk tales at large, and mythology all over the world. In Cinderella, the original story, we hear that the stepsisters cut off parts of their feet in order to fit the shoe, that the prince is hearing talking crows up in the trees as he is searching for Cinderella, which we add a lot of jokes to these days, but these were inherited stories. Cinderella has roots all the way back to China and Egypt. We think it's probably one of the oldest tales ever told, along with Beauty and the Beast. Another one which I believe is got French origins, as far as the versions that we know about. Disney has a huge hand in giving us what we know about fairy tales. As we all can kind of guess, Disney does not give the original story. As you heard me explain with Cinderella, also, the Brothers Grimm has Snow White, the Frog King, Rapunzel is another famous story, Hansel and Gretel, which we'll have a whole discussion about, I'm sure. Hansel and Gretel is huge in horror and the macabre. There's a story called The Seven Ravens that I'm sure possibly influenced Edgar Allan Poe, who is going to definitely have his own episode, and I'm sure we'll cover him several times. This podcast will mostly cover anything gothic, macabre, thriller, horror, supernatural, ghost stories, urban legends, just anything spooky. We just love Halloween and spooky and year-round, horror. I can't explain it quite enough, just how much Americans love it. H.L. Mencken once wrote that there are three genres that will never die. That's stories about Abraham Lincoln's assassination, ghost stories, and maybe he said Cinderella. I forget what the third one was, but ghost stories and stories about Abraham Lincoln's assassination, he said, will never die. And maybe romance was the third one, but it's a quote that always stuck with me when reading the essays of H.L. Mencken. Now, going back to Hansel and Gretel, in the book Primitive Mythology, which we mentioned earlier, Joseph Campbell talks about something that we now sort of have confirmed, but it's still a soft science. It's a work in progress, and it's the idea of inherited memory, DNA giving us memories of, that passed down through generations. So theoretically, if before your grandfather's conception, your great-grandfather falls off a cliff and survives, and then conceives your grandfather with your great-grandmother, your grandfather and his son or daughter or whoever is your mom or dad that you get the genes from could theoretically pass down a fear of heights or a traumatic response like that of some sort to have falling off a cliff. It is just a strange phenomena that we sort of see in storytelling, and the concept of an ogre witch that eats children that we sort of see in the Grimm's fairy tale story Hansel and Gretel, which is not exclusive to Germany. None of these stories are. Europe has sort of a interesting, each country and culture has their own version of the story, if not 10 different versions each. There's another, but anyway, going back to Joseph Campbell and the ogre witch, he has a theory that fear of cannibal witches comes from a time in human history before we had evolved completely, in which famine drove us to cannibalism, and children may have been fed to elders or vice versa. And so this sort of like, the bad guy eats children thing may have come from that memory of cannibalism. And it's, cannibalism is in recent history. um, it's not unheard of to have like some freak killer out there just sort of eating people. But also as far back as the 1500s, I think, 1600s, Europe was undergoing many changes politically, religiously, territorially, and governing wise and culturally. Like, it was such a rapid change because of lots of wars and political turmoil. Cannibalism became normalized. Marauding and murder and the Black Death normalized a lot of horror. And so in recent memory, even, it is possible that when we shudder at certain ideas, we're really remembering things from the past. It's a theory. It could be in our DNA or collective consciousness. Richard Dawkins has a theory about memes, ideas, essentially, as a unit that sort of relates to this theory. And there is some sort of overlap between Joseph Campbell and that meme theory, I believe, in my opinion. If both were to hear the story, one, and the gentleman I mentioned is dead. Joseph Campbell, I believe, is long dead. Richard Dawkins is still around, but he probably would disagree with all of this. So I am an amateur thinker. I do not have a college degree. I do not have advanced knowledge of philosophy either. But there is some credit to be given to Joseph Campbell, the Brothers Grimm, and folklore and mythology in general when it comes to spooky tales. Religion gives us a lot of background on the macabre, especially with the afterlife and ghost ideas of demons and hell and vampires even. We will have an episode about vampires existing in Hebrew literature as well as other folk tales. Folk tales will be a major role in this podcast, as well as Gothic literature. I did want to start right off the bat with Frankenstein, because Frankenstein and Dracula are all well and great, but if we don't start with the basics of storytelling, which we get from folklore and mythology, oral tradition, and our history, we're not going to have much of a basis to really go further on, because when we talk about Frankenstein and Dracula, we want to kind of refer back to what inspired Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley. And most likely we will find that fairy tales, folklore, mythology, and religion have huge impacts on both of those writers, who had huge impacts on the horror genre. And there are lots of genres that deal with spookiness. Sci-fi, which Mary Shelley is attributed to inventing, and I wouldn't be one to disagree. I mean, Frankenstein is pretty much the earliest popular novel representation of science fiction, and it's also one of the earliest influential horror novels. And I would like to interview some friends about German folklore and fairy tales and Grimm's. There will be more elaboration on that in future episodes. But these little quotes and ideas, keep them in the back of your head as we proceed further. I'd like to end this segment now with a little bit of music, and we'll jump into the next segment, which will discuss the story of Hansel and Gretel. So I would like to start off by talking about my personal experience with Hansel and Gretel. It was read to me as a child out of a book of Grimm's fairy tales. I think they were possibly abridged and illustrated for kids, but they pretty much stuck to the original story. I remember there being a house of candy, and the kids would eat the house, and then the witch would punish the kids by cooking them alive, which is pretty close to the original. The trail of breadcrumbs out into the wilderness so that they could be found wasn't as big of a part of the version that was taught to me. But, you know, there's a lot to be said about the wilderness and woods in old folklore, especially Germany. If you think about the way towns were set up, populations were concentrated in a town, and if you went out in the woods, you risked getting eaten by bears or mountain lions, and you know, especially in areas where mountain lions still existed in Europe. But yeah, bears and wolves, you could get hurt and you'd be miles away from civilization, and you'd just die out in the woods sometimes. Depending on the weather, you could be stuck out in the snow or torrential rain or some sort of predicament that prevents you from getting home in time, and you have no way of contacting anybody. And so Hansel and Gretel seems to explore that theme of wilderness that many folk tales explore. The cannibal witch part is less important. It's the most scary part, though. We're all scared of the old woman that eats children, you know. That's in a lot of folklore about witches. And I think Hansel and Gretel probably had the biggest influence on, like, witch folklore. A lot of tales about witches came from the Grimms, and it does seem to me that, you know, that outside of the church and the Maleficarum, the witch hunter's guide from the Middle Ages, which was long before Grimm's, you know, before the Salem witch trials, before the European witch trials, there was just folk tales and religion that just sort of accumulated ideas of what a witch is. It's usually an old hag. There's some sexism in there. It's usually an old woman, and they usually eat children. But yeah, I'm going to turn to some friends here, hopefully, and we'll see their thoughts and casual ideas about Hansel and Gretel, Germanic folklore, and the woods, the dark, spooky, scary woods. But first we're going to play a track from Grant, followed by another track from Grant with me acting a little silly over it. A little silliness goes a long way to lighten the mood. And it's spooky themed, so enjoy. An alien assassinated Kennedy. Bigfoot helped him in the 60s. was all planned by the Illuminati. There's lethal fluoride inside of my body. The president's gonna be a cryptid. X-Files couldn't even script this. The lizard people did in 9/11. Elvis is not in heaven. Congress is a bunch of scary ghosts. Congress is a bunch of ghosts. Bunch of scary ghosts. Congress is a bunch of ghosts.
So when you think of witches, Slade,
My girl just got this book that's called Basic Witches.
basic,
It's like basic bitches, I guess.
okay, I get the
Play
pun
on the
now.
phrase, but I'm pretty sure it's Wicca.
Okay,
I-
Wicca for dummies, kind of.
Yeah.
Not calling your girl a dummy. I'm just.
No, no, I get it. I know what you mean.
But yeah, Wicca for dummies, basic witches. Have you read it?
No, not yet. I was thinking about it today, actually. But an ex of mine knew a lot about Wicca. She practiced, and she said it was basically bullshit, but it's not harmful bullshit for the most part. It says you should be able to be free, basically. Be free to believe what you want to believe.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And basically, there's like, I think a lot of it's like meditation practices. And I think, did you ask me about witches? Like Wicca and witches are maybe a little bit different too.
Maybe.
You know, like
When we think of witches, we think of lots of different things. Like there's the folklore witch, there's the mythology witch.
and it depends on like there's different types. There's witches in like almost every region too. You know, like
I think witch is just a term that's been applied to someone that does something spellcraft or
yeah.
witchcraft related, because
They're always after the children too. They're
Yeah.
they're gonna eat the children, trap the children, put a curse on your kids. Witches are after the vulnerable.
so maybe witches are more of a
They're always
Analysis.
an old woman. It seems like a granny type, Baba Yaga and whatnot.
maybe they're more of like a don't go into the woods kind of thing.
I would have to say so, because it's like, I don't know. In the South, I had this memory going on the walk, and there was this lady whose dog was coming up to the property, and I thought she was talking to me, and she's like, "Get away, get away, get!" And she had a big wart on her nose. I thought she was a witch. And I went down to the creek and caught some crawdads and called it a day. But every time I passed by her house, she was like, "Get away, get away!" And I thought she was talking to me, but she was talking to her dog. And for the longest time, it was like, yeah, that's got to be a witch, because she has a wart on her nose. And then I saw the Monty Python's Holy Grail, but she's a witch. You know, it's like,
Most witches I've met are actually pretty attractive. I don't know if it's the witchcraft or
It's because Wiccan's really big right now with like the younger female generation.
yeah. There's this girl that I went to high school with. And I've got mine. What was her name? It was like
Esmeralda.
no, it started with no. Was it Emily? I think it was Emily.
It started with an E.
It was. I'm trying to remember the last.
Emerald green. No, I'm just kidding.
It had another. But she was like this redhead.
Mm.
Had freckles, good makeup. She's lesbian, I'm pretty sure.
Oh,
Yeah. No, she's got a cute partnership and everything going on right now. Like follow on Instagram, classmates. But she was a witch.
I've known lots of gals that are into witchcraft. It's definitely a spiritual practice nowadays in the New Age realm. As New Age having been really from the psychedelic movement, with guys like that one dude that did the Satanic Bible in the 60s, like Salman Rushdie.
not Anton LaVey.
Anton LaVey as well. Ever since those two guys came out, it was like Satanism, witchcraft. And it's kind of a nice New Age movement, I'm not going to lie, because it combines European, Asian, and random spiritual practices from other places like Africa, like northeastern Africa.
Africa, that's where the hoodoo comes from, right?
Oh yeah, hoodoo.
Yeah.
That's got to be a whole episode. I'm going to have
Oh yeah, it is.
Screaming Jay Hawkins on that one. He's like hoodoo, voodoo, rockabilly. That's some shit right there.
Didn't voodoo, like the southern, like Louisiana style voodoo, come from that original like African religion, but then was also mixed with Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot of that was mixed with the slave owners.
The Africans trying to keep some of their original faith, their like original beliefs with Chris, and
You see that in
Like
the South too with
do the white people
spirituals.
thing.
Like they'll take African songs and add Christian lyrics to them, and just like old spirituals, like what's it fucking called? Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. I could see a whole group of people playing that on pan flutes and whatnot.
We're
Banjos.
we're getting off topic. Specifically, Slade, Hansel and Gretel. What does that mean to you?
Hansel and Gretel, like witch hunters.
No, just the Grimm fairy tale
Oh,
story.
the Grimm fairy, the like the brothers Grimm.
Yeah.
Man, back in the day, I actually read this comic. It was Twisted Fairy Tales.
Okay.
It was. I don't even remember how Hansel and Gretel were. It was like a brother and a sister.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the original, they'd go into the woods, and they'd like start eating this house made of candy, right?
Yeah.
Like their parents were poor. Apparently, they just had bland meals, oatmeal all day, every day, right? They find this candy and like, oh yeah. And then the witch invites them in, cages them after like they pass out, trying to fatten them up, and they push the witch into the oven. In the version that I read first.
I heard that version too. Yeah.
Same here.
And there's another version with an ogre.
Oh yeah, there was a movie version that had the ogre, had the Sandman in it too, right? And I want to say it had like abusive stepmother.
Always.
And the ignorant father.
Ignorant father, abusive stepmother. Sounds like Cinderella.
Sounds like a lot of fairy
Did
tales.
Cinderella have a father? And did they have a father in the story? I thought it was just the stepmother.
You know, it was just a stepmother in Cinderella. You're right. Her parents were done with. And, or at least, yeah. And she's just a peasant, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Rags
think
to
they ever really
riches.
explained that.
Wasn't Cinderella adopted? She was like actually a princess, but she was like
Her parents like lost their wealth and passed away, and I guess the stepmother took custody, and stepsisters were, But in the Grimm's version, there may be a father figure that's ignorant. I forget exactly how it's laid out. There's a million different versions of that story. There's the Turnip Princess, which is southern Germany, I think. Bavarian mountain regions. I don't know if that's southern Germany, but it could be. I think that's where the Bavarian mountains are.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Bavarian's German.
And my friend who's from Germany was telling me about these, like several other collections of folk tales, and a lot of them filled with gruesome shit, like illustrations of. She was showing me illustrations of kids getting their limbs cut to pieces by garden snippers, and like these are like folktale illustrations. Yeah. They're not like pictures, so it's kind of comical looking.
Well, a lot of like the Grimm's fairy tales are actually kind of like dark, and especially for the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you look at what we have nowadays for horror compared to back then, like the Grimm's fairy tales was horror.
Yeah.
And
I feel like when someone says that grim circumstances, that word grim comes from their name, but I could be wrong. I want to say that grim is a modern word for like creepy and like daunting.
Yeah, but it's just with one M. And I'm sure the word grim has been around since the Grimm brothers. And whether or not it's a pseudonym, it doesn't really matter. That's the name they adopted. And maybe even, I don't know, I'd have to look it up, but maybe even there's a possibility that the word grim comes from the Grimm fairy tales.
That's what I was positing there. I think that the word comes from their names because of how dark the tales are. Like Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella. And
how old, in fact, are these tales?
Very old.
So they're a lot older than the Grimms. The Grimms were interviewing old people up in the mountains and out in the wilderness and like countrysides, and in like the 1860s, I think. In the 1870s, Franz von Schoenwerth followed their footsteps and got his own set of stories, which were similar plots, different character names, and like Cinder Ashes is a popular version of Cinderella. I feel like there's a Hansel and Gretel and the Turnip Princess as well. But these tales are most likely 300 years older than that, so they could have come around about the 1500s, back when rural rustic life was, Germany was undergoing many different changes at the time.
We all know the fairy tale of the witch who lives in a candy house that would be nice to eat. Indeed, we have seen already what a scare she gave to a child who conjured her up in play. She is kind to children and invites them into her tasty house only because she wants to eat them. She is a cannibal. And for some 600,000 years of human experience, cannibals, it should be borne in mind, and even cannibal mothers, were grim and gruesome, ever present realities. Cannibal ogresses appear in the folklores of peoples high and low throughout the world. And on a mythological level, the archetype is even magnified into a universal symbol in such cannibal mother goddesses as the Hindu Kali, the Black One, who is a personification of all consuming time, or in the medieval European figure of the consumer of the wicked dead, the female mouth and belly of hell. That was a quote that I was trying to find earlier in this episode by Joseph Campbell. And the book is called Primitive Mythology, The Masks of God. It's a really good read, and it's a series called The Masks of God. There's primitive mythology, Occidental mythology. I forget the other two. There's two others. But yeah, it's a good series. I did want to start out reading Hansel and Gretel, and I think that is worth noting that this will be sped up a bit because I like to take my time. But anyways, Hansel and Gretel, we have discussed, is a basic story about a candy house witch who lures children into her oven, and she gets, in two different versions, the kids get eaten or the witch get baked alive, and I don't know. We're about to read and find out what the Grimm's version is. This is the Grimm's fairy tale version in the edition translated with an introduction by Jack Zipes, and it is a pretty nice complete fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm collection, published by Pantheon, which is kind of a neat publisher in my opinion. But let's get right on to it. Hansel and Gretel. A poor woodcutter lived with his wife and his two children on the edge of a large forest. The boy was called Hansel and the girl was called Gretel. The woodcutter did not have much food around the house, and when a great famine devastated their entire country, he could no longer provide enough for his family's daily meals. One night, as he was lying in bed and thinking about his worries, he began tossing and turning. Then he sighed and said to his wife, "What's to become of us? How can we feed our poor children when we don't even have enough for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what," answered his wife. "Early tomorrow morning we'll take the children out into the forest where it's most dense. We'll build a fire and give them each a piece of bread. Then we'll go about our work and leave them alone. They won't find their way back home, and we'll be rid of them." "No, wife," said the man. "I won't do this. I don't have the heart to leave my children in the forest. The wild beasts would soon come and tear them apart." "Oh, you fool," she said. "Then all four of us will have to starve to death. You better start planting the boards for our coffins." She continued to harp on this until he finally agreed to do what she suggested. But still, I feel sorry for the poor children, he said. The two children had not been able to fall asleep that night either. Their hunger kept them awake, and when they heard what their stepmother said to their father, Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel, "Now it's all over for us." "Be quiet, Gretel," Hansel said. "Don't get upset. I'll soon find a way to help us." When their parents had fallen asleep, Hansel put on his little jacket, opened the bottom half of the door, and crept outside. The moon was shining very brightly, and the white pebbles glittered in front of the house like pure silver coins. Hansel stooped down to the ground and stuffed his pocket with as many pebbles as he could fit in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Don't worry, my dear little sister. Just sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." And he lay down again in his bed. At dawn, even before the sun began to rise, the woman came and woke the two children. "Get up, you lazy bones. We're going into the forest to fetch some wood." Then she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "Now you have something for your Monday meal, but don't eat it before then because you're not getting anything else." Gretel put the bread under her apron because Hansel had the pebbles in his pocket. Then they all set out together towards the forest. After they walked a while, Hansel stopped and looked back at the horse. He did this time and again until his father said, "Hansel, what are you looking at there? Why are you dawdling? Pay attention and don't forget how to use your legs." "Oh, father," said Hansel, "I'm looking at my little white cat that's sitting up there on the roof of the house and wants to say goodbye to me." "You fool," the mother said. "That's not a cat. It's the morning sun shining on the chimney." But Hansel had not been looking at the cat. Instead, he had been taking the shiny pebbles from his pocket, constantly dropping them on the ground. When they reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Children, I want you to gather some wood. I'm going to make a fire so you won't get cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered together some brushwood and built quite a nice little pile. The brushwood was soon kindled, and when the fire was ablaze, the woman said, "Now, children, lie down by the fire and rest yourselves. We're going to the forest to chop wood. When we're finished, we'll come back and get you." I'm just going to stop you right there. That sounds like complete bullshit, right? I mean, here's these kids just, overhearing all this. I know they're about to get ditched. And Hansel's got some plan with some fucking pebbles. Okay. I want to sit up and read the rest of this. Now, I recommend you get yourself a copy of Grimm's Fairy Tales if you are a big fan of spooky literature. That is one really good place to start. Now, I didn't really finish this story because I'm trying to keep a good lax vibe about this podcast. Yeah, it's a very long story, and it's not a bad translation, but it's not necessarily easily readable, out loudable translation. So yeah, I will say that discussion segments and exhibit segments will be more well thought out. All the episodes in general will be more well thought out. But yeah, Hansel and Gretel go out in the woods, find some witches. I'm gonna leave off with some nice tracks here, just some instrumentals, just a good minute to reflect on the silly discussion we had, the silly reading that we did, and the silly analysis, pseudo-analysis of the fear of the unknown. I feel like future episodes will still have fear of the unknown in the episode title, because I feel like this first season is definitely going to explore the fear of the unknown. In fact, the next episode that we do this season is going to be The Thing at the Top of the Stairs by Ray Bradbury. It's going to be a Fear of the Unknown episode. It'll be our episode 2. I'm going to ask the guys what scares them. You know, what is scary to them? How much of that fear is fear of the unknown, and you know, how much of it is self-preservation. I'll also ask them irrational fears, like what are some things you're scared of that aren't really like normal to be scared of. Like, for example, I'm scared of someone looking through my bedroom window as I'm sleeping. Even though I have blackout curtains, it's still something I think about. When I was a kid, I would see faces in the window. You know, there's all kinds of fears that we have that aren't necessarily realistic fears. And it's kind of interesting to explore those things. But yeah, next episode, I like to call Ray Bradbury the favorite uncle of Halloween, at least for me. He is a Halloween head, just like myself, and I feel like Bradbury is a good place to start at after the Grimm's fairy tales, just because this story is a little less antiquated than Hansel and Gretel, a little less gruesome, but also like it's just classic macabre literature, and it's a great story for the fear of the unknown, and I'll leave it at that. But I hope you enjoyed the little snippet of Hansel and Gretel. I didn't really cover the witch because we all remember the witch, candy house, and breadcrumbs. We don't remember the pebbles that Hansel leaves behind to get back home to trick his parents. You know, like lots of different parts of that story. There's alternate versions of Hansel and Gretel where there's a little brother, little sister is another tale. But yeah, get yourself a copy. It's time for Jackie to go to bed. It's time, get yourself a copy of Grimm's Fairy Tales. And if you know what's good for you, you will buy everything by Ray Bradbury. But I won't fault you if you just buy The October Country. Or Dark Carnival, which recently got released. It's pretty much an extended version of The October Country. Yeah. Go buy some books and read them. Enjoy these tracks by Grant Howard.